Stephen's name was called. He hurried down the steps of the theater so as to be as far away from the vision as he could be and peering closely at his father's initial hid his flushed face. But the word and a vision capered before his eyes as he walked back across the quadrangle and towards the college gate. It shocked him to find in a other world a trace of what he had deemed till then a brutish and individual melody of his own mind. His monstrous reveries came thronging into his memory. They too had sprung up before him suddenly and furiously, out of mere words. He had soon given into them and allowed them to sweep across and abase his intellect, wondering always where they came from what then of monstrous image, and always weak and humble towards others, restless and sickened of himself when they had swept over him. Abated. And there is a grocery sure enough, cried Mr. Dedalus. You often heard me speak of the groceries. Didn't you, Stephen? Many's the times we went down there when our names had been marked. A crowd of us. Harry Peart and a little Jack Mountain and Bob Diaz and Maurice Moriarty, the Frenchman, and Tom O'Grady and Mick Lacey that I told you of this morning, and Joey Corbett and a poor little good-hearted Johnny Kivers of the 10th list. The leaves of the trees along the marred lake were austere and whispering in the sunlight. A team of the crickets passed. A gay young man in flannels and blazers, one of them carrying the long green wicket bag. In a quiet by street a German band of the 5 players in faded uniforms and with battered brass instruments was playing to an audience of street Arabs and leisurely messenger boys. A maid in a white cap and apron was watering a box of the plants on a steel which shone like a slab of limestone in the warm glare. From another window open to the air came the sound of the piano, scale after scale rising into the treble. Stephen walked on at his father's side, listening to stories he had heard before, hearing again the names of the scattered and dead rebels who had been companions of his father's youth. And a faint sickness sighed in his heart. He recalled his own equivocal position in Belvedere. A free boy, a leader afraid of his own authority, proud and sensitive and suspicious, battling against the scholar of his life and against the riot of his mind. The letters cut in stained wood of the desk stared upon him, mocking his bodily weakness and fuddled enthusiasm, and making him laud himself for his own mad and filthy orgies. The spittle in his throat grew bitter and full to swallow, and a faint sickness climbed to his brain, so that for a moment he closed his eyes and walked on in the darkness. He could still hear his father's voice. When you kick out for yourself, Stephen, as I dare say you will one of those days. Remember, whatever you do, to mix with gentlemen. When I was a young fellow, I tell you, I enjoyed myself. I mixed with a fine, decent fellow. Every one of us could do something. One Philip had a good voice. Another fellow was a good actor. Another could sing a good comic song. Another was a good oarsman or a good racket player. Another could tell a good story, and so on. We kept the ball rolling anyhow and enjoyed ourselves and saw a bit of life, and we were none of the worse of it either. But we were all gentlemen, Stephen. At least I hope we were. Any bloody, good, honest Irishman, too. That's the kind of fellow I want you to associate with. Fellow of the right kidney. I'm talking to you as a friend, Stephen. I don't believe a son should be afraid of his father. No, I treated you as your grandfather treated me when I was a young chap. We were more like brothers than fathers and son. I was standing at the end of the South Trace one day with some mannies like myself, and sure we thought we were grand fellow because we had the pips stuck in the corners of our mouth. Suddenly the governor passed. He didn't say a word or stop even. But the next day, Sunday, we were out for a walk together, and when we were coming home, he took out his cigar case and said, "By the by, Simon, I didn't know you smoked," or something like that. Of course, I tried to carry it off as best I could. "If you want a good smoke," he said, "try one of these cigarettes. An American captain made me a present of them last night in Queenstown." Stephen heard his father's voice break into the laugh which was almost a sob. He was the handsomest man in Cork at the time. By God, he was. The women used to stand to look after him in the street. He heard the sob passing loudly down his father's throat and opened his eyes with a nervous impulse. The sunlight breaking suddenly on his sides turned the sky and the clouds into the fantastic world of sombre masses with lake-like spaces of dark rosy light. Rosy light, his very brain was sick and powerless. He could scarcely interpret the letters of the signboards of the shop. By his monstrous way of life, he seemed to have put himself beyond the limits of reality. Nothing moved him or spoke to him from the real world unless he heard in it an echo of the infuriated cries within him. He could respond to no earthly or human appeal. Dumb and insensible to the call of the summer and a gladness and companionship, weird and dejected by his father's voice. He could scarcely weird and dejected by his father's voice. He could scarcely recognize as his own thoughts, and repeated slowly to himself, I'm Stephen Deadless. I'm walking beside my father, whose name is Simon Deadless. We are in Cork, in Ireland. Cork is a city. Our room is in a Victoria hotel. Victoria and Stephen and Simon. Simon and Stephen and Victoria names. The memory of his childhood suddenly grieved him. He tried to call forth some of its vivid moments, but could not. He recalled only names Dante, Parnell, Klein, Klangos. A little boy had been taught geography by an old woman who kept 2 brushes in her wardrobe. Then he had been sent away from home to a college. He had made his first communion and eaten Slim Jim out of his cricket cap and watched the firelight leaping and dancing on the wall of the little bedroom in infirmary and dreamed of being dead, of mass being said for him by the rector in a bag and a gold cup, of being buried in a little graveyard of the community of the main avenue of the lines. But he had not died then. Parnell had died. There had been no mass for a dead in a chapel, and no procession. He had not died, but he had faded out like a film in the sun. He had been lost or had wandered out of existence, for he no longer existed. How strange to think of him passing out of existence in such a way. Not by death, by the fading out in a sun, or by being lost and forgotten somewhere in a universe. It was strange to see his small body appear again for a moment. A little boy in a grey belted suit. His hands were in his side pockets, and his trousers were tucked in the knees by elastic bands. On the evening of the day on which the property was sold, Stephen followed his father meekly about the city from bar to bar, to the sellers in the market, to the barman and the barmaids, to the beggars who importuned him for a lob. Mr. Douglas told the same tale. That he was an old Corknian, that he had been trying for 30 years to get rid of his Cork accent up in Dublin, and that Peter beside him was his eldest son, but that he was only a Dublin jackin. They had set out early in the morning from Newcomb's coffee house, where Mr. Douglas' cup had rattled noisily against its saucer. and Stephen had tried to cover the shameful sign of his father's drinking bout of the night before by moving his chair and coughing. One humiliation had succeeded another. The false smile of the market sellers, the curvetting and uglings of the barmaids with whom his father flirted, the compliments and encouraging words of his father's friend. They had told him that he had the great look of his grandfather, and Mr. Douglas had agreed that he was an ugly likeness. They had unearthed a trace of the Cork accent in his speech and made him admit that the Lee was a much finer river than the Liffey. One of them, in order to put his Latin to the proof, had made him translate short passages from Dejected, and asked him whether it was correct to say tempora mutantur nos et monster in illis, or tempora montantur et nos mutmer in illis. Another, a brisk old man whom Mr. Douglas called Johnny Cashman, had covered him with confusion by asking him to say which were prettier, the Dublin girls or the Cork girls. He is not the way built, said Mr. Douglas. Leave him alone. He is a level-headed thinking boy who doesn't bother his head about the kind of the nonsense. Then he is not his father's son, said the little old man. I don't know, I'm sure, said Mr. Douglas, smiling complacently. Your father, said the little old man to Stephen, was the boldest flirt in the city of Cork in his day. Do you know that? Stephen looked down and studied the tidal floor of the bar into which they had drifted. No, don't be putting ideas into his mind, said Mr. Douglas. Leave him to his maker. Yera, sure I wouldn't put any ideas into his head. I'm old enough to be his grandfather. And I'm a grandfather, said the little old man to Stephen. Do you know that? Are you? Asked Stephen. Betted I am, said the little old man. I have two bouncing grandchildren out of the Sunday's well. Now then, what age do you think I am? And I remember seeing your grandfather in his red coat riding out to hounds. That was before you were born. Uh, or tough off, said Mr. Douglas. I did, repeated the little old man. And more than that, I can remember even your great-grandfather, old John Stephen Douglas, and a fierce old fire eater he was. Now then, there is a memory for you. That's 3 generations. 4 generations, said another of the company. Why, Johnny Cashman, you must be nearing the century. Well, I tell you the truth, said the little old man. I'm just 27 years of age. We are as old as we feel, Johnny, said Mr. Dedalus. And just finish what you have there, and we'll have another. Here, Tim, or Tom, or whatever your name is. Give us the same again here. By God, I don't feel more 18 myself. There is that son of mine there, not half my age, and I'm a better man than he is any day of the week. Draw it mild now, Dedalus. I think it's a time for you to take a back seat, said the gentleman who had spoken before. No, by God, asserted Mr. Dedalus. I'll sing a tenor song against him, or I vault a fire barricade against him, or I run with him after the hounds cross the country, as I did 30 years ago, along with the curry boy and the best man for it. But he'll beat you here, said the little old man, tapping his forehead and raising his glass to drain it. Well, I hope he'll be as good a man as his father. That's all I can say, said Mr. Dedalus. If he is, he'll do, said the little old man. And thanks be to God, Johnny, said Mr. Dedalus, that we lived so long and did so little harm, but did so much good, Simon, said the little old man gravely. Thanks be to God we lived so long and did so much good. Stephen watched the 3 glasses being raised from the counter as his father and his 2 cronies drank to the memory of their past. And a bit of fortune of the temperament sundered him from them. His mind seemed older than theirs. It shone coldly under strifes and happiness, and regrets like a moon upon a younger earth. No love or youth stirred in him as it has stirred in them. He had known neither the pleasure of the companionship with others, nor the vigour of the rude male health, nor filial piety. Nothing stirred within his soul but a cold and a cruel and a loveless lust. His childhood was dead or lost, and with it his soul capable of a simple joys, and he was drifting amid life like a barren shale of the moon. Art to play for weariness of climbing heaven and gazing on the earth wandering companionless. He repeated to himself the lines of the Shelley fragment. It's the alternation of the sad human infectionless with the waste inhuman cycles of activity chilled him. and he forgot his own human and in fact traveling grieving. Stephen's mother and his brother and one of his cousins waited at the corner of the quiet Forster place while he had and his father went up the steps of long for the colonel where he had highlighted sentry was parading. When they had passed into the great hall and stood at the counter, Stephen drew forth his orders on the governor of the Bank of Ireland for 30 and £3, and the sums the moneys of his exhibition and the essay prize were paid over to him rapidly by the thaler in notes and in coin respectively. He bestowed them in his pockets with feigned composure and suffered the friendly teller, to whom his father chatted, to take his hand across the broad counter and wish him a brilliant career in after life. He was impatient of their voices and could not keep his feet at rest. But the teller still deferred the serving of the others to like giving a boy's a best education that money could buy. Mr. Douglas lingered in a hall gazing about him and up at the roof and telling Stephen, who urged him to come out, that they were standing in a House of Commons of the old Irish Parliaments. God help us, he said piously, to think of the men of those times. Stephen, Helly and Flood and Henry Grattans of the Irish people at home and abroad. Why? By God, they wouldn't be seen dead in a 10-acre field with them. No, Stephen, old chap, I'm sorry to say that they are only as I rode out his fine May morning in a merry mount of the sweet Julie. A keen October wind was blowing round the bank. The three figures standing at the edge of the moodly path had pinched cheeks and watery eyes. Stephen looked at his thinly clad mother and remembered that a few days before he had seen a mantle priced at 20 guineas in a window of the Brandos. Well, that's done, said Mr. Douglas. We had better go to dinner, said Stephen. Where? Dinner? Said Mr. Douglas. Well, I suppose we had better. What? Some places that not too dear, said Mr. Douglas. Underdowns? Yes, some quiet place. Come along, said Stephen quickly. It doesn't matter about the dearness. He walked on before them with short, nervous steps, smiling. They tried to keep up with him, smiling also at his eagerness. Take it easy like a good young fellow, said his father. We are not out for the half-mile, are we? For swift season of merrymaking, the money of his prizes ran through Stephen's fingers. Great parcels of the groceries and the delicacies and dried fruits arrived from the city. Every day he drew up a bill of the fare for the family, and every night led a party of the 3 or 4 to the theatre to see Ingmore of the Lady of the Lions. In his coat pocket he carried squares of the Vienna chocolate for his guests, while his treasure pockets bulked his masses of the silver and copper coins. This video is taken for Navid Daria's page.